Taemin opened his eyes to another morning in hell. The same cracked ceiling stared back at him from above his makeshift bed in what used to be the mining colony's medical bay. 3 months had passed since the explosion that killed everyone else, and he still woke up expecting to hear voices in the hallway. There were no voices anymore. He sat up slowly, his body aching from sleeping on the thin mattress he had dragged from the crew quarters. The air tasted stale and metallic, filtered through dying machines that wheezed and groaned as they struggled to keep him alive. Every breath reminded him that he was living on borrowed time. The morning routine never changed. Check the oxygen levels, check the water recycler, check the food supplies. Each number was a little worse than the day before, but Taemin wrote them down anyway in his logbook. Someone might find these records someday. Someone should know what happened here. Outside the small window next to his bed, the asteroid's surface stretched away into darkness. Kepler 442c was nothing more than a chunk of rock floating in space, valuable only for the rare metals buried deep in its core. The mining company had built this colony to extract those metals, and they had cut every corner they could to save money. Now the colony was a tomb, and Taemin was its only mourner. He pulled on his work clothes and walked through the empty corridors, toward the cafeteria. His footsteps echoed in the silence, a lonely sound that followed him everywhere. The emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the walls, making the familiar hallways look alien and threatening. The cafeteria had been the heart of the colony when 400 people lived here. Workers would gather for meals, sharing stories, and complaints about their shifts in the mines. The room had been full of laughter and conversation, the smell of food and the clink of dishes. Now it was just empty tables and chairs, covered in a thin layer of dust. Taemin walked to his usual spot by the large viewport that looked out into space. He had chosen this table because it gave him the best view of the stars. Sometimes ships passed by in the distance, their lights twinkling like moving stars. He would wave at them even though he knew they could not see him. His breakfast was the same as always. 1 protein bar, half a cup of recycled water, and a vitamin pill. The food tasted like cardboard, but it kept him alive. He ate slowly, making each bite last as long as possible. When you only had enough food for maybe 2 more weeks, every meal became precious. As he ate, Taemin stared out at the stars and remembered better times. He thought about his sister back on Earth who had begged him not to take this job. She had said the mining companies did not care about their workers, that they would sacrifice anyone for profit. He had laughed at her worries then. He was not laughing now. The explosion had happened during the night shift. Taemin had been in the surface monitoring station, checking readings from the automated equipment. The mine supervisors had been pushing the crews harder lately, demanding more ore despite warnings about unstable rock formations. They had ignored the safety protocols, disabled the automatic shutoffs, and ordered the miners to keep digging. D-tier. Blast had torn through the main mining levels like thunder. Emergency alarms screamed as sections of the colony lost power and atmosphere. Taemin had tried to reach the evacuation shuttles, but the corridors were blocked by debris and twisted metal. By the time he found another route, the shuttles were gone. He had spent the first week searching for other survivors. He called out names until his voice was raw, checked every room and storage compartment, even ventured into the damaged sections wearing an emergency suit. But the mine levels were completely destroyed, and the evacuation had been too rushed and panicked. People had been left behind, trapped in collapsed sections or overcome by toxic gases. Taemin was the only one who had been far enough from the blast to survive. The rescue beacon had worked for about a month before its power cells died. He had sent distress signals every day, explaining his situation and begging for help. But Kepler 442c was far from the main shipping routes, and the mining company had probably written off the colony as a total loss. It would be cheaper to abandon one survivor than to send a rescue ship. That was how these companies worked. Taemin had learned that lesson too late. He finished his breakfast and walked to the control room to check on the life support systems. The main computer still functioned, though several warning lights blinked red on the status board. The oxygen recycler was operating at 60% efficiency. The water system was better, but not by much. The fusion reactor that powered everything was stable for now, but it needed maintenance that Taemin did not know how to perform. He was a surface technician, not an engineer. He could keep the basic systems running, but when something major broke down, he would be helpless. In the afternoons, Taemin usually worked on small projects to keep his mind busy. He had repaired some of the damaged furniture in the cafeteria, organized the remaining supplies, and even started a small garden using seeds from the kitchen. The plants were struggling in the artificial light, but they gave him something to care for besides himself. Today he decided to visit the communications room. The main transmitter was broken, but there were smaller emergency radios that might still work. He had tried them before without success, but he kept trying anyway. Hope was sometimes all that kept him going. The radio crackled with static when he turned it on. He adjusted the frequency and tried different channels, listening for any sign of life in the vast emptiness of space. Most of the time there was nothing, but occasionally he would pick up fragments of distant conversations or automated signals from passing ships. Those voices reminded him that the universe was still full of life, even if he was alone on this dead rock. As evening approached, Taemin returned to the cafeteria for his dinner. The viewport showed the same view of stars and darkness, but he never got tired of looking at it. Space was beautiful in its own cold way, and it helped him feel connected to something larger than his small bubble of survival. He ate his meal slowly and thought about tomorrow. The oxygen would last another week, maybe 2 if he was careful. The food would run out first. When that happened, he would have to make some difficult choices about how he wanted to spend his final days. But tonight he was still alive, still breathing, still hoping that maybe someone would find him before it was too late. In the silence of space, Taemin finished his dinner and prepared for another night of dreams about home. Taemin was checking the water recycler when the colony's sensor system began to scream. The warning alarms had not sounded in 3 months, and the sudden noise made him jump so hard that he hit his head on a low pipe. He rubbed the sore spot and ran toward the control room, his heart pounding with excitement and fear. The main display screen showed something impossible. Dozens of contacts had appeared on the edge of the sensor range, moving toward the asteroid at incredible speed. The computer was struggling to count them all, but Taemin could see at least 50 separate signals getting stronger by the minute. Ships. Real ships with real people inside them. He had dreamed of this moment for months, but now that it was happening, he did not know what to do. His hands shook as he tried to activate the emergency beacon, but the transmitter was still broken. He switched to the backup radio and began broadcasting on all frequencies. "This is Mining Colony 7 on asteroid Kepler 442c, he said into the microphone. "I am the sole survivor of an industrial accident. Please respond. I repeat, this is a human survivor requesting immediate assistance." The radio crackled with static, but no voices answered. The ships kept coming closer. Taemin ran to the viewport in the cafeteria to get a visual confirmation. At first, he saw nothing but stars, the same view he had stared at every day for 3 months. Then something moved against the darkness and his breath caught in his throat. The ships were not like anything he had ever seen before. They were huge, easily 10 times larger than the biggest cargo haulers that had visited the colony. Their hulls seemed to be made of some kind of crystal or glass that glowed with soft blue and green light. The shapes were smooth and curved, more like living things than machines. They were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. More ships appeared as Taemin watched. They moved in perfect formation, like a school of fish swimming through the ocean. The lead vessel was the largest, its crystalline surface pulsing with patterns of light that reminded him of a heartbeat. Behind it came smaller ships arranged in neat rows and columns. This was not a rescue mission. This was a fleet. The ships stopped just outside the asteroid's weak gravity field and held position. Taemin could see them clearly now through the viewport, their alien forms casting strange reflections in the cosmic dust. He had read about first contact scenarios in science fiction stories, but he had never imagined it would happen to him. He was about to meet aliens, and he was completely unprepared. The radio in the control room suddenly came to life with a burst of sound that was definitely not static. Strange voices spoke in a language that sounded like music mixed with whale songs. The words rose and fell in complex patterns that hurt his ears to listen to. He adjusted the volume and tried to make sense of what he was hearing. The voices stopped, and silence returned. Then a new voice began to speak, clearer than the others. It was definitely female, with a tone of authority that made Tae-min stand up straighter, even though no one could see him. The alien words were still incomprehensible, but something in the voice suggested intelligence and curiosity rather than hostility. On the largest ship, Queen Nari stood on her command bridge and studied the readings from her science officers. The asteroid held only one life form, a member of a species they had never encountered before. The creature's biosignature was strange but not threatening, and the energy readings from its habitat suggested a level of technology far below their own. "My queen," said Commander Wu Jin, approaching her with obvious concern. "We should maintain our distance until we know more about this species. They could be dangerous." Nari's skin shifted to a pale gold color, indicating deep thought. Her people had explored the galaxy for thousands of years and cataloged hundreds of different species. Most were primitive, some were hostile, and a few had achieved limited space travel. But this one was different somehow. "Show me the habitat scans," she said. The holographic display revealed the mining colony in detail. Most of it was damaged or destroyed, but one small section still maintained life support. The single occupant moved through the corridors alone, apparently the only survivor of whatever disaster had struck this place. "The creature has been isolated for approximately 90 standard days," reported Science Officer Hai-jin. "Its biosigns indicate stress and malnutrition, but also remarkable resilience. Most species would have died or gone insane under such conditions." Nari found herself fascinated by this information. Survival in isolation was considered one of the greatest tests of mental strength among her people, but it was rarely faced by individuals. Their society was built on collective cooperation and shared responsibility. The idea of one being enduring months of complete solitude was both horrifying and impressive. "What do we know about their technology?" she asked. "Primitive but functional," Hai-jin replied. "They use fusion power and basic life support systems. Their construction methods are crude but effective. The habitat appears to be a resource extraction facility, probably abandoned after an industrial accident." Commander Wu Jin stepped forward again. "My queen, I strongly recommend we observe from a distance and compile a full report before making any contact. This species is unknown and potentially unpredictable." But Nari was already moving toward the exit. Her royal robes flowed behind her as she walked, the embedded crystals pulsing with her increasing excitement. This was the most interesting discovery her fleet had made in decades, and she was not going to waste the opportunity. "Prepare my shuttle," she ordered. "I want to meet this survivor in person." The bridge fell silent. Royal Advisor So Young stepped out from behind her monitoring station, her skin flashing bright orange in alarm. "Your Majesty, that is absolutely forbidden," she said. "Queens do not make personal contact with unknown species. The risk is too great, and the precedent would be catastrophic. If something happened to you, the entire empire would be thrown into chaos." Nari paused at the doorway and turned to face her advisors. Her skin had shifted to deep purple, the color of absolute determination. "I have made my decision," she said. "This creature has survived alone for 3 months in conditions that would break most minds. I want to understand how and why. Prepare the shuttle and have the fleet maintain defensive positions." Back on the asteroid, Tae-min watched as one of the smaller ships separated from the fleet and began moving toward the colony. His heart raced as he realized the aliens were actually coming to visit him. He ran through the corridors, checking his appearance in the reflective surfaces and trying to think of what he should say. First contact with an alien civilization was about to happen in his empty cafeteria, and he was still wearing his dirty work clothes. The alien shuttle touched down on the colony's landing pad with barely a whisper of sound. Through the viewport, Tae-min could see a tall figure emerging from the craft, moving with grace and purpose toward the main entrance. His hands trembled as he waited by the airlock door. In a few moments, everything would change forever. The airlock door hissed open with a sound that Taemin had not heard in 3 months. His heart hammered against his ribs as he stepped back from the entrance, unsure whether to run or stand his ground. The corridor filled with a soft blue light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Then she appeared. The alien was taller than any human Taemin had ever seen, nearly 7 feet in height, but moving with the fluid grace of a dancer. Her skin was like polished silver that shifted colors as she moved, flowing from pale blue to soft green to warm gold. She wore simple robes that seemed to be made of liquid starlight, and her large eyes held an intelligence that made him feel small and exposed. She was the most beautiful and terrifying thing he had ever seen. Queen Nari stepped into the human habitat and immediately noticed the stale air and failing systems. Her advanced senses picked up the scent of fear and desperation that clung to everything in this place. The human stood frozen in the corridor, staring at her with wide eyes that showed more curiosity than terror. Interesting. She had expected the creature to flee or attack when faced with the unknown. Instead, it held its ground and studied her just as carefully as she studied it. The human was smaller than her people, with pale skin marked by months of poor nutrition and stress. Its clothing was dirty and worn, but it stood straight despite obvious weakness. There was dignity in this small being that impressed her. Taemin found his voice after what felt like hours of silence. "Hello," he said in the common language, though he doubted the alien would understand. "My name is Taemin. I am human." Nari tilted her head at the sounds, processing them through her translation implant. The device had been analyzing the humans' radio transmissions since their arrival, building a basic understanding of the language. The words were simple but clear. "I am Nari," she replied, her voice carrying harmonics that made the air seem to vibrate. "I lead the ships you have seen." Taemin's legs nearly gave out when he heard her speak his language. The accent was strange and musical, but every word was perfectly understandable. He had dreamed of rescue for months, but he had never imagined his rescuer would be an alien queen. "You speak human language," he said, stating the obvious, because his brain could not process anything more complex. "I learn quickly," Nari said. "Your radio signals taught me much. You have been alone here for many days." 3 months, Taemin said. "Everyone else died in an accident. I thought I would die. Here too." Nari's skin shifted to a deeper blue, a color that indicated sadness among her people. The human's isolation was even more complete than her sensors had indicated. 3 months of total solitude would have driven most beings to madness. Yet this creature seemed mentally stable despite obvious physical decline. "You are strong," she said. "Most would not survive such loneliness." Taemin almost laughed at that. He did not feel strong. He felt tired and hungry and scared. But something in the alien's tone made him stand a little straighter. "I had to survive," he said. "Someone needed to remember what happened here. Someone needed to tell the truth about how my people died." This response fascinated Nari even more. The human was not just surviving for its own sake, but carrying the burden of memory and justice for its dead companions. This was a concept her people understood well, though they had never encountered it in such a personal form. She began walking deeper into the colony, and Taemin fell into step beside her. He found himself explaining what had happened, describing the mining operation and the corporate negligence that had led to the disaster. Nari listened carefully, her translation implant working to understand not just the words but the emotions behind them. They passed through empty corridors and abandoned work areas. Nari observed everything with keen interest, noting the crude but functional technology and the signs of hasty evacuation. The human's living space was pathetically small and sparse, but it was clean and organized. Even in desperation, the creature maintained standards. "Where do you eat?" Nari asked when they reached the living quarters. "The cafeteria," Taemin replied. "It has the best view of space. I like to watch the stars while I eat." He led her to the large room with its empty tables and chairs. The viewport dominated one wall, showing the alien fleet hanging in space like glowing jellyfish. Nari could see her own flagship among them, its crystalline hull pulsing with the steady rhythms of life support and communication systems. Tae-min sat at his usual table by the window, the same spot where he had eaten every meal for 3 months. The chair across from him had been empty all this time, a constant reminder of his isolation. Nari looked at the small human sitting alone at the enormous table and felt something she had never experienced before. Her people lived in vast cities where millions of beings shared every experience. Loneliness was unknown to them, as foreign as breathing underwater. But this human had chosen to face the darkness alone rather than give up. Without thinking, she sat down across from him. The action was so unexpected that Tae-min could only stare. On her flagship, Commander Wu Jin was frantically trying to contact his queen through the communication implant. But Nari had switched it off. Royal advisor, So Young was threatening to send a security team to extract her by force. But Nari ignored them all. She was focused entirely on the human across from her, this small creature who had somehow survived impossible circumstances through pure determination. "You eat alone every day," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Tae-min replied. "For 3 months every meal has been alone." Nari reached into her robes and withdrew a small container. Inside was her own food, a mixture of nutrients and flavors that sustained her people during long journeys. She had intended to eat it on the shuttle ride back to her ship. Instead, she placed it on the table between them. "No one should eat alone," she said. Tae-min looked at the offered food, then at the alien queen who had traveled across the galaxy to sit at his empty table. His eyes filled with tears he had held back for months. Not tears of sadness, but of gratitude and wonder at this simple act of kindness. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his own meal, one of his last protein bars. He placed it on the table next to her container. "Thank you," he said. "I had forgotten what it felt like to share a meal." Nari's skin shifted to warm gold as she understood the significance of this moment. In all her years of ruling an empire that spanned star systems, she had never done anything as radical as sitting down to eat with an unknown alien. But somehow, it felt like the most natural thing in the universe. Outside the viewport, the alien fleet waited in perfect formation while their queen shared a simple meal with the last human in the darkness between the stars. Neither of them knew it yet, but this moment would change the course of galactic history. Sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest power. Nari and Tae-min began to eat together, 2 beings from different worlds finding common ground in the universal act of sharing food and company. In the vast emptiness of space, they were no longer alone. The shared meal began in silence. Tae-min unwrapped his protein bar with careful hands, trying not to show how much they trembled. Across from him, Queen Nari opened her container to reveal something that looked like small, glowing pearls floating in golden liquid. The sight was beautiful and alien, but somehow it made him feel less alone. Neither of them spoke at first. They simply ate. 2 beings from different worlds sharing the most basic act of survival. Tae-min chewed his tasteless food bar slowly, making each bite last as long as possible. He had learned to do this over the past 3 months, stretching every meal to feel less empty. Nari watched him eat with growing fascination. Her people consumed food for pleasure as much as nourishment, but this human treated his simple meal with reverence. Each bite seemed precious to him, as if it might be his last. "Your food," she said carefully, testing the words in his language. "It gives you strength, but no joy." Tae-min looked up from his meal, surprised by her observation. "It keeps me alive," he said. "That is enough." "Is it?" Nari asked. She picked up one of the glowing pearls from her container and held it toward him. "This is sustenance from my world. It carries the taste of home." Tae-min stared at the offering, unsure if he should accept it. The pearl glowed with soft blue light and smelled like flowers he had never encountered. It could be poisonous to humans, or sacred to her people, or any number of things that might make accepting it dangerous. But Queen Nari had sat down at his table when she could have stayed safely on her ship. She had chosen to eat with him when she could have ignored his existence entirely. The least he could do was trust her gift. He reached out and took the pearl. It felt warm in his fingers and seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. When he placed it in his mouth, flavors exploded across his tongue like nothing he had ever tasted. It was sweet and complex, with hints of spice and something that reminded him of summer rain. "It is beautiful," he said, and meant it. Nari's skin shifted to warm gold, pleased by his reaction. She had never shared her people's food with an alien before, but his genuine appreciation made the gesture feel right. On the flagship orbiting above them, Royal Advisor So Young paced back and forth. In the communication center, the Queen had disabled her personal transmitter, cutting off all contact with her advisors. This was completely unprecedented behavior for a Kethmaran ruler. "We should send a security team," she said to Commander Wu Jin for the 5th time in an hour. "The Queen is compromising herself and the entire empire for the sake of one primitive alien." Wu Jin stood at the observation window, watching the distant asteroid where his queen sat with the human. He had served under 3 different rulers in his long career, but he had never seen any of them take such a personal interest in another being. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "that is exactly what the Empire needs." So Young stopped pacing and stared at him. "You cannot be serious. Our traditions exist for good reasons. Queens do not associate with aliens. They certainly do not eat meals with them like common citizens. Our traditions also say that strength comes from understanding," Wu Jin replied. "This human has survived alone for 3 months. Most of our people would have died or gone insane in a fraction of that time. Maybe our queen sees something in him that we are missing." Back on the asteroid, Taemin and Nari continued their meal. The language barrier was challenging, but they found ways to communicate through gestures and simple words. Taemin showed her pictures on his datapad of Earth and his family, explaining human customs and culture as best he could. Nari listened with growing amazement. Human society was so different from her own that it seemed almost impossible. They lived as individuals rather than collective groups. They made personal choices about their lives and careers. They even chose their own life partners instead of having them assigned by social planners. "You were alone by choice before the accident," she said, struggling to understand this concept. "You left your family world to work on this rock in space." "Yes," Taemin said. "I wanted to make money for my sister's education. She dreams of becoming a doctor, but the schools are expensive. I thought if I worked hard for a few years, I could help her achieve her goal." This idea fascinated Nari even more. The human had chosen to endure hardship and isolation for the benefit of another person, someone not even present to appreciate the sacrifice. Her people would never make such individual decisions. Their lives were planned by committees for the greater good of society. "Your sister," Nari said carefully. "She did not want you to come here." Taemin smiled sadly. "No. She said the mining companies were dangerous, that they cared more about profit than worker safety." She was right, but I thought I knew better. As they talked, Nari began to understand the true scope of what had happened to the human colony. The mining corporation had cut safety measures to save money, ignoring warnings from their own engineers. When the disaster happened, they had abandoned the survivors rather than mount an expensive rescue mission. This kind of individual callousness was unknown in Kethmaran society. Their collective culture prevented such selfish decisions because every choice was made for the benefit of all, but it also prevented the kind of personal sacrifice that Taemin had made for his sister. "Your people," Nari said, "they value individual choice over collective safety." "Sometimes," Taemin admitted, "it can lead to problems like what happened here. But it also means we can choose to be better than our circumstances. We can decide to keep fighting when logic says we should give up." Science Officer Hee Jin had been monitoring the conversation from the ship, analyzing both the words and the emotional patterns in their voices. What she discovered surprised her enough to call Commander Wu Jin to her station. "Sir," she said, "you need to see these readings. The humans' stress levels have dropped dramatically since the Queen began. sharing his meal. His brain chemistry shows patterns we typically associate with family bonding among our own people. Wu Jin studied the data with growing interest. What are you saying? I think the queen has accidentally triggered a powerful psychological response in this creature, He Jin explained. Humans appear to form emotional connections through shared experiences, even with beings they have just met. The simple act of eating together has created a bond between them. This information explained much about the queen's unprecedented behavior. If the human was somehow influencing her emotional state through their interaction, it would account for her willingness to break tradition. But as Wu Jin watched the readings, he realized something else. The effect was working both ways. The queen's own biosigns showed the same kind of bonding patterns. She was not just studying the human anymore. She was connecting with him on a personal level. On the asteroid, Tai Min had begun telling Nari about his 3 months of isolation. He described the daily routine that had kept him sane, the small projects that had given him purpose, and the moments when despair had nearly overwhelmed him. The hardest part, he said, was not the hunger or the failing life support. It was eating every meal alone. Food tastes different when there is no one to share it with. Nari's skin shifted to deep blue, the color of profound sadness among her people. She had never experienced true loneliness, surrounded as she was by millions of loyal subjects. But through the human's words, she began to understand what he had endured. You never gave up hope, she observed. I wanted to, Tai Min admitted. Many times, but someone needed to remember what happened here. Someone needed to tell the truth about how my friends died. If I gave up, their stories would die with me. This sense of individual responsibility impressed Nari more than anything else the human had said. He had chosen to suffer rather than let the truth be forgotten. He had carried the burden of memory, alone because it was the right thing to do. Her own people would have shared such a burden among many individuals, making it easier to bear. But perhaps there was strength in facing it alone, a kind of personal courage that her collective society could not produce. Your friends, she said, they would be proud of your choice. Taemin's eyes filled with tears, the first he had allowed himself to shed since the disaster. I hope so, he whispered. Queen Nari reached across the table and placed her large hand over his smaller one. The gesture was instinctive, driven by emotions she did not fully understand. Her skin glowed with warm silver, a color that meant comfort and protection. You are not alone anymore, she said. In that moment, both of them felt something fundamental shift in their understanding of the universe. A connection had formed between two vastly different beings, bridging the gap between species and cultures through the simple act of sharing food and stories. On the flagship above, alarms began sounding as the crew detected massive energy fluctuations from the asteroid. But these were not signs of danger. They were the first tremors of change that would reshape galactic civilization forever. 3 days had passed since Queen Nari made her decision to bring Tai Min aboard the flagship. The human now stood in the center of the Royal Council chamber, surrounded by the most powerful beings in the known galaxy. His simple work clothes looked out of place among the flowing robes and crystalline ornaments of the Kethmoran nobles, but he held his head high. The council was not happy. Your Majesty, said High Counselor Jinwu, his skin flashing angry orange patterns. You have violated every law and tradition of our empire. No alien has ever been allowed aboard the sacred flagship. The ancestors would curse us for this madness. Queen Nari sat on her crystal throne, unmoved by the protests. Her skin glowed with steady gold, the color of absolute certainty. Beside her throne, Tai Min waited quietly, still amazed that he was alive and breathing clean air again. The ancestors valued strength and honor above all else, Nari replied. This human has shown both in greater measure than many of our own people. He deserves our respect, not our fear. Captain Dalho stepped forward from his position by the door. As head of the Royal Guard, he was responsible for the Queen's safety. The idea of an unknown alien living on their most sacred ship made his job much harder. My Queen, we know nothing about this creature's true nature, he said. It could be, carrying diseases or planning some kind of attack. How can we trust something so different from ourselves? Taman spoke for the first time since entering the chamber. His voice was quiet but clear, and the translation devices carried his words to every corner of the room. I understand your concerns, he said. If strangers came to my world and asked to live among us, my people would be suspicious too. But I'm not here to cause harm. I am here because your queen showed me kindness when I had given up hope. The council members exchanged glances. They had expected the alien to be primitive and crude, but it spoke with wisdom and dignity. Several of them began to reconsider their opposition. Royal advisor So Young remained unconvinced. She had served the Empire for centuries and had never seen anything like this situation. Even if we accept that this human means no harm, she said, what precedent does this set? Will we now welcome every alien we encounter? Will our ships become gathering places for every strange creature in the galaxy? Queen Nari stood up from her throne, her tall form commanding attention from everyone in the room. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of absolute rule. This human taught me something important, she said. We have grown weak in our strength. We have become so concerned with following old rules that we have forgotten why those rules existed. They were meant to protect us and help us grow, not to make us afraid of everything different. She walked down from the throne platform and stood next to Taman. The size difference between them was dramatic, but somehow they looked like equals. For thousands of years, our empire has expanded by conquering weaker species or ignoring them completely. Nari continued. We have learned nothing new because we believed we already knew everything. But this small human survived 3 months alone in conditions that would have killed most of us. He did not survive through superior technology or military might. He survived through will and determination and hope. Commander Wu Jin, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. What exactly are you proposing, Your Majesty? Nari's skin shifted to brilliant silver, the color of new beginnings. I am proposing that we learn from this human and his species. I am declaring that humanity will be placed under the protection of the Kethmoran Empire. Any who harm them will answer to me personally. The council chamber erupted in shocked voices. This was unprecedented in the history of their civilization. They had never offered protection to aliens before, especially not to a species they had just discovered. Furthermore, Nari continued, raising her voice above the protests, Tamin will serve as the first human ambassador to our empire. He will travel with us to the homeworld and help establish formal relations between our peoples. Timon felt dizzy at the magnitude of what was happening. 3 days ago, he had been dying alone on an asteroid. Now he was being made an ambassador to an alien empire. The responsibility was overwhelming. Your Majesty, he said carefully, I am honored by your offer, but I am just a mining technician. I know nothing about diplomacy or politics. Surely there are better choices among my people. There are no better choices, Nari replied. You have already proven your worth by surviving impossible circumstances. More importantly, you understand the value of hope and persistence. These are qualities our empire needs to remember. High Counselor Jinwu stepped forward again, but this time his skin showed thoughtful blue instead of angry orange. If we are to do this unprecedented thing, he said, we must do it properly. The human will need to learn our customs and protocols. He will need proper clothing and quarters befitting an ambassador. And he will need protection from those who might not welcome his presence. Captain Dalho nodded in agreement. I will assign my best guards to watch over him. If he is to represent his species, he must be kept safe at all costs. Science Officer Haye Jin, who had been studying Taimin's biological readings since he came aboard, spoke up from her position near the data displays. The human's physiology is remarkably adaptable, she reported. His body has already begun adjusting to our ship's atmosphere and gravity. His brain scans show exceptional resilience and learning capacity. From a scientific standpoint, this species shows great promise. Over the following weeks, as the fleet traveled toward the Kethmoran homeworld, Tamin learned to navigate his new role as humanity's first galactic ambassador. The ship's educational systems downloaded basic knowledge of alien cultures and diplomatic protocols directly into his brain. The process was uncomfortable but effective. He spent hours each day with Queen Nari, sharing stories about human culture and history. She was particularly fascinated by human concepts of individual freedom and personal responsibility. Her people had always lived in collective harmony, but they had perhaps lost something in the process. "Your species does not fear being alone," she observed during one of their conversations. "You find strength in isolation that we cannot understand." "We do fear it," Taemin corrected gently. "But we also know that sometimes being alone is necessary to discover who we really are. It teaches us to rely on ourselves and to value the connections we make with others." The Royal Council gradually warmed to their new ambassador. His quiet wisdom and genuine curiosity about their culture impressed even the most skeptical nobles. He asked thoughtful questions and offered insights that helped them see their own society from a new perspective. When the fleet finally reached the Kethmaran homeworld, news of the human ambassador had already spread throughout the empire. Millions of beings gathered to catch a glimpse of this strange creature, who had somehow convinced their queen to change thousands of years of tradition. Taemin stood on the bridge beside Queen Nari as their ship approached the planet. The world below was beautiful beyond description, with crystal cities that caught and reflected the light of twin suns. He thought about the mining colony where he had almost died, and marveled at how much his life had changed. "Are you ready for this?" Nari asked. Taemin smiled, the first truly happy expression he had worn in months. "I survived 3 months alone in space. I think I can handle meeting your people." As their ship descended toward the planet's surface, both of them knew that this was only the beginning. The friendship between a human and an alien queen would grow into something much larger, an alliance that would reshape the galaxy and give humanity its place among the stars. The last human was no longer alone, and neither was the queen who had chosen to sit down and share her meal with a stranger. In the darkness,